Jack Turner was used to driving at night. As a freelance journalist, deadlines were always looming, and late-night drives to meet editors had become routine. This New Year's Eve was no exception. His friend had convinced him to celebrate the holiday together, but Jack was already running late. The roads were unusually empty, the faint hum of his car the only sound in the cold winter air. Snowflakes danced under the headlights, creating an almost hypnotic effect as he navigated the winding forest road. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 10:47 p.m. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a text from his friend. "Where are you? Hurry up. There's something you have to see." Jack smirked. Typical Dave, always cryptic. As he rounded a bend, his car jolted unexpectedly. The trunk open alert flashed on his dashboard. Jack sighed, muttering a curse under his breath. He pulled over to the side of the road, leaving the engine running as he stepped into the freezing air. The trunk was wide open, but what made his stomach drop was the suitcase inside. It was unzipped. Jack's hands trembled as he inspected it. He swore he'd locked it before leaving. But then he froze. In the soft glow of the brake lights, he saw footprints in the snow, leading away from the car and vanishing into the woods. They were small, like a child's. Jack's breath quickened. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing into the silence. No response. He slammed the trunk shut and rushed back into the car, locking the doors. As he adjusted the rear-view mirror, he caught something, or someone, moving behind him. A woman. She stood in the middle of the road, pale and barefoot, her long hair whipping in the wind. He blinked and she was gone. Heart pounding, Jack floored the gas, desperate to reach Dave's house. His mind raced with rational explanations, but none of them held up. Minutes later, the phone buzzed again. Another text from Dave. "You're late. Just get here, and whatever you do, don't stop for anyone." Jack felt a chill crawl down his spine. As he approached another curve, the headlights flickered briefly, and for a split second, he saw the woman again, this time on the side of the road. Her head snapped toward him, her black eyes locking onto his. Jack yanked the steering wheel, narrowly avoiding a tree. The car skidded to a stop and Jack sat there, hyperventilating. He didn't notice at first, but the silence was deafening. No hum of the engine, no rustling of the trees, just stillness. But then he heard it, a soft rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the trunk. Jack's mind screamed at him to drive, but his body betrayed him. He stepped out, gripping his flashlight with trembling hands. As he approached the trunk, the tapping grew louder and faster. When he flung it open, he expected to find nothing. But instead there was an envelope, pristine and white, resting on the suitcase. Jack picked it up. His name was written on it in elegant cursive. With shaking hands, he opened it. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. His blood ran cold. The photo showed him sitting in his car, taken just moments ago from the woods. The headlights flickered again, and when they steadied, the woman stood in front of the car, her face contorted in rage. Jack screamed, stumbling back, but as soon as he blinked, she was gone. He didn't wait. Jumping into the car, he sped down the road, his heart pounding like a drum. When he finally reached Dave's house, he collapsed onto the porch, banging on the door. Dave opened it, his face pale. "Jack, what happened to your face?" Jack frowned, rushing to the mirror in the hallway. His reflection stared back at him, but something was off. The scratches. Thin red lines ran across his cheeks, as if someone had clawed at him. Dave grabbed his arm, pulling him into the living room. "Jack, you're scaring me. Did you see her?" "Who?" Jack shouted, shaking him. Dave swallowed hard. The woman in the forest. She doesn't want anyone leaving once they see her. Jack's phone buzzed one last time. It was another text. This time from an unknown number. The trunk is open again. For the past 5 years, ringing in the new year with a weekend cabin trip had been a tradition for Mark, Claire, Ethan, and Julie. This year's getaway, however, felt different. The cabin sat deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town, blanketed by thick snow and eerie silence. Mark had snagged the place off a rental site, but its price, unusually cheap, was their first red flag. It's old school rustic, Mark had argued. No Wi-Fi, but we'll make do. Besides, who's going to be checking their phones on New Year's Eve? The group agreed. But as they pulled into the driveway late that evening, the cabin loomed like a shadow against the moonlit sky. Its windows reflected the darkness around it, and the air carried a strange stillness. The interior wasn't much better. Dust clung to the furniture. The wooden floor creaked with every step, and the fireplace looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Ethan joked, "Well, if a serial killer wanted to crash our New Year's, this would be the place to do it." The rest of them laughed nervously, but none of them disagreed. The night started innocently enough. They drank, played games, and joked about the creepy vibe of the cabin. As midnight approached, Claire decided to explore the basement, hoping to find an old stereo to liven up the party. "You're braver than I am," Julie said, hugging a blanket tighter. "Basements are the worst," Ethan added. "If I'm not back in 5 minutes, send help." Claire smirked. Noted. The basement stairs groaned under Claire's weight as she descended into the dark. The air was damp and smelled of mildew. Her flashlight swept across the room, revealing dusty shelves and cobweb-covered furniture. As she searched, her beam landed on something odd. A grandfather clock in the corner, its face cracked and hands frozen at 11:53 p.m. Claire shivered and quickly turned away. On the far wall, she found an old, rusted stereo system. "Gotcha," she muttered, hauling it toward the stairs. But as she turned to leave, something caught her eye. But then she noticed faint scratches on the wall above the clock. When she moved closer, she realized they weren't random. They were numbers, carved deep into the wood. 10, 9, 8. Claire frowned. It was a countdown, but it didn't make sense. Counting down to what? A faint knocking sound interrupted her thoughts. It was rhythmic and deliberate, coming from the far wall. Claire froze, her flashlight shaking. "Hello?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. The knocking stopped. "Mark? Ethan?" she called again, climbing the stairs as fast as she could. But before she reached the top, the basement door slammed shut. Claire banged on it, her heart racing. "Very funny, let me out!" The others heard her and came running. "We didn't lock it!" Mark shouted, yanking the door open. "What the hell?" Claire whispered as she stumbled out. "That wasn't funny." "We didn't touch it," Julie said, her face pale. "We've been here the whole time." Claire looked back toward the basement. The knocking had started again. Faint, but now faster. They tried to brush it off as a quirk of the old house, but unease crept over them. Midnight was only minutes away. As they huddled around the fireplace, a low hum filled the room. Ethan sat bolt upright. "Do you hear that?" The others nodded, their faces pale. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls. Suddenly, the clock in the living room began chiming. Its hands moved on their own, striking 11:58 p.m., even though it had been broken earlier. Mark laughed nervously. "Okay, that's freaky, but—" The chime interrupted him. It rang again and again, louder each time. Julie screamed, pointing to the fireplace. The flames, once cozy and warm, turned a deep, unnatural blue. Shadows danced along the walls, flickering in shapes that didn't belong to anyone in the room. But then the knocking from the basement grew louder. It was no longer rhythmic. It was frantic, as though someone or something was trying to break out. Mark grabbed a flashlight. "I'm going to check it out." "Are you insane?" Claire yelled. "No one's going back down there." But Mark ignored her and descended the stairs. The others waited in tense silence, the clock still chiming in the background. Mark's scream cut through the air. Ethan bolted after him, only to find Mark standing frozen in the middle of the basement, staring at the clock on the wall. The countdown scratches had changed. Now they read 5, 4, 3. "It's counting down," Mark whispered, his voice trembling. "It's counting down to midnight." Ethan grabbed him. "We're getting out of here, now." Back upstairs, they all grabbed their coats and ran for the door, but when they tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. The windows were frozen shut, the glass warped as if the house itself was alive. The living room clock chimed 11:59 p.m. The air grew heavy, pressing down on them. Shadows circled closer, their movements erratic and predatory. And then, as the final chime struck, the knocking stopped. Complete silence fell over the cabin. The group barely had time to breathe when they noticed something horrifying. The shadows had stopped moving. They were now standing in the room with them,